My life rarely seemed unusual to anyone. I was never a doctor, surgeon, or person in a white coat whose decisions determine people's lives. No, I was just a system administrator at a medical center, the kind of person most employees only remember when their computer or printer stops working or the internet suddenly goes down. At first glance, it may seem that my work is completely unrelated to medicine. I don't make diagnoses, save patients in operating rooms, or prescribe medication. But every day I see people's fates being decided in the offices next door. And perhaps that's what makes my job special. I'm somewhere between the world of machines and the world of human lives. At the medical center where I worked, life was bustling from early morning. The corridors were filled with patients, some holding papers with test results, some clutching their stomachs, some looking confused, and some just nervously waiting their turn. Nurses ran back and forth, doctors came and went from their offices, and I sat in my little room with computers and servers. My workplace resembled a miniature headquarters, a desk with 3 monitors, cables scattered haphazardly, tools for repairing equipment, boxes with hard drives and flash drives. Sometimes it looked chaotic, but I always knew where everything was. The next morning started uneasily for me. I woke up before the alarm clock and lay for a long time staring at the ceiling. The words of a friend, spoken the night before, did not give rest. He rarely complained about his health, and he was never one of those who dramatize or seek attention. And here, a month of pain, fatigue in the voice, a request for help. I understood that he was being treated for a reason. The drive to work that day seemed longer than usual. On the bus, I looked out the window, and all the faces of the passers-by seemed alien and distant. All I could think about was, what if he's got something serious? And if I don't have time to help? When I entered the medical center, the corridors were still empty. I've always loved those first hours when the huge building was just waking up. The semi-darkness, the smell of freshly scrubbed floors, the hum of ventilation. Everything seemed to freeze before the storm, before dozens of patients would rush in with their stories and problems. I checked the server room, turned on the hardware, and made sure that there were no failures overnight. But my thoughts weren't about work. I found myself looking at my watch every 5 minutes. I had a feeling inside that something important was going to happen today, and I couldn't get rid of it. He showed up around lunchtime. I immediately recognized him among the crowd. His gait had changed. He walked more slowly, more carefully, as if listening to every movement. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was tired. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a mask than a real smile. "Well, hello, it guy from God," he said, trying to make a joke. But the voice sounded hoarse, without the usual energy. "Hi," I replied, trying not to show my excitement. "How are you?" "I'm just holding on. But, brother, to be honest, it's getting worse every day." He automatically put his hand on his stomach. "You've thought of something, haven't you?" "Yes. I made a deal. You will be accepted without waiting in line." We walked down the hallway together. I noticed how people turned to look at him. There was something about his appearance that immediately betrayed his pain. He tried to stay straight, but every move was difficult. "I stopped at the doctor's office." "Then you do it yourself." "I can't go inside," I said. He nodded. "I understand. Thanks for helping. The main thing is to say something." His eyes betrayed more than his words. There was hope in them, but also fear. The fear of finding out the truth, which he may have already anticipated. He went into the office, and I stayed in the hallway. Time passed painfully slowly. I sat down on a chair and looked at the tiles on the floor. Every minute seemed like an hour. I could hear patients passing by, phones ringing at the reception desk, and someone laughing in the next office. But all the sounds seemed distant, as if I were in another world. I tried to guess what the doctors would say. Could it be an ulcer? Being treated? Maybe gastritis? It's not fatal either. I even tried to calm myself down with the thought that maybe it was just nervous. He works a lot, doesn't rest much. But the longer he didn't come out, the harder it got. Finally, the door opened. He went out. I knew right away that the news was bad. His face was pale, and his lips were pursed. He walked past me without seeming to notice. "Hey, wait." I caught up with him. "What did they say?" "Later," he said shortly. "Not now." There was so much weariness and heaviness in his voice that I didn't insist. I saw that he was barely holding on. He left, and I remained standing in the hallway. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking. I felt like I had to find out the truth. I took a deep breath and made up my mind. He returned to the office and knocked. The doctor, a middle-aged man, took off his glasses and looked at me wearily. "Yes. I'm sorry, I know I shouldn't ask, but this man is my friend. He just visited you. Please tell me what's wrong with him." The doctor looked into my eyes for a long time. There was no irritation or anger in his gaze, only sympathy. To be honest, everything is very bad for him. I felt my stomach tighten. What is it? His stomach and intestines are affected. There are multiple microlanguages. They bleed, some heal, and new ones appear in their place. The process does not stop. The body cannot cope. I don't want to scare you, but I'm afraid he doesn't have more than 6 months left. 6 months. Those 2 words sounded like a hammer blow. There was a ringing in my ears. It was like I stopped hearing everything else. 6 months. Maybe there is a chance? A mistake? I asked, almost in a whisper. I wish I was wrong, the doctor sighed. But the picture is clear. We will do additional research, but the prognosis is extremely difficult. I left the office without feeling my feet under me. The corridor swam before my eyes. People, nurses, and patients all blurred into a blur. There was only one thing pounding in my head: 6 months. 6 months. 6 months. I stopped at the window to catch my breath. The sun was shining outside. Someone was laughing on the street. Cars were passing. Life went on as if nothing had happened. But the world has changed for me. I realized that now I have 6 months to be with him. 6 months to support, to look for options, to fight. 6 months, which may turn out to be the most important in my life. I've been restless all morning. The work lay in front of me, as always, but my hands refused to obey. The monitors glowed with their usual windows, the servers hummed with their steady bass, and all I did was look at my watch. When the time came, I met him at the entrance. He looked even more tired than the day before. Her skin was paler, her eyes duller. It was as if the very air around him was heavy. "Ready?" I asked, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "Is there a choice?" He chuckled, but it was a bitter smile. We went into the building together. The patients in the corridors, the smell of antiseptic, the voices of the nurses, all of this suddenly seemed strange and cold to me. I realized that for the first time I feel like I'm not an employee here, but an ordinary person who's scared. He checked in, and then they took him to the office. I stayed waiting. I didn't know if it was an hour or an eternity. Only fragments of thoughts were spinning in my head. What if maybe it's not that bad? When he came out, I immediately realized that the news was bad. His steps were heavy, and his eyes were empty. "Well?" I asked cautiously. "Let's do it later," he replied softly. "Not now." He left, and everything inside me collapsed. I didn't know what exactly he had heard, but I felt it was something terrible. Later, I went to the doctor myself, and I heard the words that changed everything. He has no more than 6 months left. From that moment on, my world split into before and after. After talking to the doctor, I went out into the hallway, as if stunned. The world around them seemed the same. Patients were sitting in line. Someone was arguing at the reception. A nurse was carrying a stack of cards. But everything has changed for me. I kept only one word in my head: no more than 6 months. I walked slowly down the hallway, trying to collect my thoughts. The doctor spoke calmly, almost matter-of-factly, but his every word stabbed into me like a sharp knife. I knew that this was not a sentence for me personally, but I still felt as if my life had been shortened to these 6 months. My thoughts were confused. At first there was anger. Why is that? Why him? Then desperation. What can I do? Nothing. And then came the guilt. I was the one who helped him get here. I opened the door to this world myself, where instead of hope, he was given a figure of 6 months. I found him at the exit. He was sitting on a bench, staring at the floor. His hands were shaking, but he was trying to hide it. "Well," he said softly, "now I know the truth." I was silent. I couldn't find the words. Funny, isn't it? All your life you think, "I'll make it, I'll do it later," and suddenly they tell you that you have almost no afterwards. There was no crying in his voice, just exhaustion. And that scared me even more. I sat down next to him. I wanted to support him, to say something right, but all the words seemed empty. Listen, I finally managed. We'll find a way out. The doctors are wrong. There is treatment. There are new methods. I'm not going to let it end like this. He turned to me and smiled for the first time, sincerely but sadly. Thanks. But honestly, I don't expect miracles, just stay close. Those words hit harder than the diagnosis, because there was a request in them that I could definitely fulfill. That day, I realized that even if I'm not a doctor and I can't cure him, I can be there for him. And sometimes that's the most important thing. After that conversation with the doctor, I couldn't find a place for a long time. Working at the medical center, which previously seemed calm and familiar, suddenly became a source of heaviness. Every computer, every system was reminded of, I'm here because of an accident, and my friend is here because of a disaster. I was sitting in the server room, the hum of the fans calmed me down, but my thoughts kept coming back to the same thing. Is there anything I can do? I was not a doctor, but I was able to search for information, find solutions where others had given up. And I decided that it was my duty not just to sit next to each other, but to look for options. I began to study medical databases, foreign articles, and tried to connect to closed forums where new treatment methods were discussed. Every day I learned more about his illness. The deeper I went, the clearer I realized that standard protocols were ineffective. But there were experimental techniques, research in Europe and the USA, and patient support programs. I came to his house with a stack of printouts and a laptop. He greeted me wearily, but smiled. You look like you're ready to take a medical exam. Almost, I replied. Look, there are options. Here is a clinic in Germany. Here is a study in Houston. There is even a program where they take patients for free if they fit the parameters. He listened, nodding occasionally, but there was not the spark in his eyes that I had hoped for. You see, he said softly, it all sounds like a chance. But the chance is not for me. I don't have the energy, money, or desire to fly all over the world. I'm tired. I felt my stomach tighten. I wanted to scream, you have no right to give up. But I saw his hands thin, trembling, with bandages on his fingers. I saw his eyes full of pain. And I realized that he has been fighting for a long time, which I have only just begun to realize. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Then we will fight here. I'm here, and as long as there's even the slightest chance, I won't stop. He looked at me and said firmly for the first time in a long time, you know, sometimes I think you're the only reason I'm holding on. If it wasn't for you, I would have already let everything go. These words were a hard but honest gift for me. It was then that I realized that the ordeal that had befallen both of us was not just his illness. This is a test of our friendship, my faith, and my willingness to be there even when hope is fading. We started dating more often. Sometimes we just sat in silence, watched old movies, and reminisced about our youth. Sometimes we talked for hours about the future, the one that might never be. And in every conversation, I saw that it was getting harder to trust him, but it was getting easier to trust me. I kept looking. I wrote letters to doctors and sent documents to various clinics. Most of them responded coldly or were completely silent. But I didn't give up. Because now it was more than helping a friend. It became my life's work. And somewhere inside, I began to realize that even if a miracle doesn't happen, even if the disease turns out to be stronger, the main thing is that he won't go through it alone. The longer we fought, the harder it became to maintain our confidence. At first, I was full of enthusiasm. I believed that I would find a solution. I would find a way out. But over time, the realization came. Sometimes, even the most modern technologies, the best doctors in the world, are not able to change the outcome. I remember one evening. We were sitting at his house, and there was a mug of unfinished tea on the table. He was pale, his eyes were sunken, and his skin looked thin, almost transparent. He slowly ran his hand over his stomach, sighed, and said, you know, the scariest thing is not that you're going to die. The worst thing is that they will forget. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to say that he will never be forgotten, that I will always remember. But inside, the thought matured. Memory is a cruel thing. It erases even the brightest moments over time. Don't say that, I said. We'll find a way. Maybe, he smiled, but I'm already starting to look elsewhere for meaning. Those words stuck with me for a long time. The next day, I found myself looking at people in the corridors of the center differently. Previously, they were just a queue of patients, But now each person seemed like a possible story, tragedy, or miracle. I suddenly realized how often we live on the surface without thinking that there might be a person nearby who only has a few months left. I started reading philosophy more. Socrates, Camus, Viktor Frankl. They wrote about the meaning of life in conditions of pain, suffering, and war. I was looking for a clue on how to help not only my friend's body, but also his soul. And I realized a simple thing. When a person is on the verge, it's not how many days are left that matters to him, but how he feels these days. I started asking myself questions. What if he's right? What if instead of fighting for a miracle, you should just live the rest with dignity? Not in hospital rooms, not in queues for doctors, but in conversations, laughter, and simple things. We started walking. Sometimes he could barely stand on his feet, but we went out to the park next to his house. We sat on a bench, watched the children ride bicycles, and listened to the birds. He said it was better than any medicine. One day he said, "You know, I'm not afraid of pain anymore. I'm afraid I won't have time to tell everyone I care about." These words were a revelation to me. I realized that my task is to help him not just live, but complete what he considers important. We started writing a list. He called it a list of unfinished business. There were simple things there. Meeting old friends, going to the lake where we were teenagers, writing a letter for my mother. Every item on this list has become like a small victory for us. We performed them one by one, and I could see how his gaze was changing. He wasn't getting healthier, but he was getting more alive. And I realized at some point that I was finding a new meaning for myself. I used to live by work, computers, networks, and endlessly solving technical problems. But next to him, I began to wonder, what will be left after me? Who's going to say a word about me if I'm gone tomorrow? So my friend's illness became a mirror in which I saw my own life. And as scary as it may sound, it was his journey to the end that helped me really think about the beginning for the first time. Sometimes the most important conversations take place in silence. We could sit next to each other for hours without saying a word. I was working on my laptop and he was reading a book or just closing his eyes. At such moments, I felt that there was something more between us than words. An invisible connection that required no explanation. I realized that friendship is not just about conversations, support, or advice. It's the ability to be there even when you don't know what to say. We began to enjoy the little things. He was saying, "Look at how the sunset falls on the roofs. It's beautiful, isn't it?" Or, "This tea smells like summer is hidden in it." Previously, I would have passed by without noticing. But now I was learning to see through his eyes. It turns out that the power of small moments is much more important than the global plans that we often load our lives with. The list of unfinished business was shrinking. We met with old friends, and the evening turned out to be both joyful and bitter. They laughed, recalled the past, but everyone understood that these memories were becoming farewell. We went to the lake, sat by the water, were silent, listened to the wind rustling in the reeds. He said, "Now I can leave in peace." I felt alive again. But he still had other plans. He wanted to record some video messages for later. One for the mother, the other for the younger brother. I helped with the camera, edited the sound. It was a difficult evening because every word sounded like a legacy. One night, he called me and asked me to come over. When I entered, he was sitting by the window, looking at the moon. "Listen," he said, "I'm not afraid of death anymore. But I'm afraid you'll be empty when I'm gone." I stopped talking. Not because there was no answer, but because the answer was stuck somewhere deep in my heart. He continued, "Promise me, when I'm gone, you won't shut yourself in. Live on. Do what we've been putting off. Don't waste your time." Those words were like a testament. I nodded, and that night we talked for a long time about everything, about childhood, about dreams, about how everyone leaves, but friendship remains if it is preserved in deeds. When dawn broke, I realized that this night would be a landmark for me for the rest of my life. The last few weeks had been the hardest. The disease was taking away his strength faster than I expected. He rarely left the house, lay down more often, and sometimes could not even get out of bed. But there was still light in his eyes. Not as bright as before, but real. I often came and just sat next to him. He read books aloud, played his favorite music, told the news, even if he was dozing and not listening. At such moments, I felt that it wasn't what I was saying that mattered, but the fact of my presence. He knew he wasn't alone. One day he said, "You know, I'm grateful for this disease. Yes, she's destroying me. But she gave me time. It's time to understand what's important. It's time to say goodbye. It's time to say thank you to those who were nearby." These words were a shock and a comfort to me at the same time. I realized that he had found his peace inside the pain. And maybe that's something I should learn too. We've completed the last item on his list. It said, "Watch the sunrise together." I took him in a wheelchair to the roof of his house. We sat wrapped in blankets and watched the sky slowly turn golden. He smiled and said, "That's it. I'm calm now." I didn't answer. He just nodded because tears made it difficult to speak. A few days later, he was gone. I remember the silence of that morning. I remember how everything seemed unreal. I was walking down an empty street and I didn't understand. How can the world continue to live if it is no longer there? But then I remembered his words. Don't waste your time. And I realized that it was my duty not to sink into grief, but to live in such a way that there was something real in every day. After he left, I often returned to the list. And I decided I will do it not only for him, but also for myself. I started traveling, meeting people I had long lost sight of, writing down my thoughts, and trying new things. Every step was like a continuation of his path. He said, "Live." And I lived. Over time, the pain dulled, but the memory remained. I realized that friendship is not something that ends with death. True friendship lives in actions, in decisions, in the way you keep moving forward. Sometimes I come to the lake where we were sitting. I look at the water, I remember his words, and I feel that he is near. Not physically, but in my heart, in my actions, in my outlook on life. And every time, I thank fate that I had such a friend. Even if it was only for a few decades, the last few months may have been difficult, but they showed what true intimacy means. Today, as I tell this story, I want to leave it as a legacy, not just about illness and loss, and the fact that every day is a chance to say thank you, a chance to be close, a chance to notice the beauty of the sunset or the warmth of tea. We often think that time is endless, but it is limited, and that's what makes it valuable. My friend left, but he left me the main lesson: you need to live now. Love is now. Appreciate it now. And if someone hears this story and lives at least one day differently, it means that his life has not been in vain.